I put together a little presentation about the AI inflection point. Like, how did we get here? Sort of like, is this the next big thing potentially? If so, how can we kind of frame that up? So I'm going to plow through that one for you guys. And then you probably are really familiar with the Google versus Microsoft showdown that's been happening recently. I'll get into some of the I'll do kind of a flyover on some of the finer points there as well too. And then it's really interesting what's going on with the legal ramifications of AI. Probably something that we should all be aware of before jumping feet first into it. I will also then show off kind of a cool tool that I saw, and then a little bit of a news update as well. So checking online. Hey, Ethan, thanks for the thumbs up. And all right, so I'm going to jump right into this here. So first of all, a lot of graphs and interesting stuff for you guys to look at, but some of these are really fascinating to me. So let's take a little bit of a trip back in time here, and we're going to actually look at a couple of other really major inflection points of technology, which were cloud and mobile. And I think the 2000s kind of messed us up a little bit on our perspective on how long ago these things were. So let's take a quick look at that. So first of all, mobile technology paved the way for growth as a major consumer internet companies like Uber and Lyft, potentially some of the ways that you guys might have gotten here tonight, Instagram, Snap, Robinhood, and all those. They were actually established, it's kind of interesting to think about, between 2009 and 2013. It's kind of nuts to think that it's only been around that part of our lives that way. And now it's had such a significant impact. And in the 2010s, digital advertising, which is a pretty good indicator of where all this is going, underwent a major transformation as everything shifted towards mobile. I think you guys can probably remember when you were looking at your website traffic and determined, oh my gosh, look at how many people are actually logging on through a mobile, which is probably the same for a lot of people around that time. And for example, companies like Facebook at that time really switched their ad spends. You can kind of see how this, what we're looking at here is mobile. And then right about 2016 is really where things kind of flip-flop. And if you look at just a couple of years back, that's the 3x on investment for digital advertising, which is really kind of an interesting indication of the impact of mobile, no doubt. And cloud at the same time, kind of amazing to see the adoption of cloud here. It's been a key player in the growth of software as a service, SaaS, and has transformed data as a extremely valuable resource for business. So some of the companies that emerged between 2009 and 2013 were the Slacks and the Airtables, with all due respect, Stripe, Plaid, Snowflake, Databricks, all leveraged the power of cloud for their success. Now, the interesting thing here is, if you look at this, the percentage of, so what we're looking at here is corporate data on the cloud. So the percentage of corporate data on the cloud between 2015 and 2022 doubled. And if you want to see who's actually making hay on that, let's just take a look at AWS's service revenue over the past decade. I mean, look at this. They definitely ate during COVID, right? So a significant uptick, especially if you apply a 35% profit margin to that, absolutely nuts, right? A lot of people think Amazon's making all their money off of the couple of bucks off of they make off of all the products you send. It's really AWS, and that's probably what Microsoft's play is here as well, as we'll get to here shortly. And then VCs are going crazy about this. I mean, if you look at the spike over here in the 2021, it's pretty obvious where all the money is going for venture capital investments. This used to be mobile and cloud technology driving forces behind all the advancements in tech in the 2010s. Obviously, .com was a big thing at the end of the 90s. But some of the technologies were really, everybody's just kind of figuring out, kind of at this point here in 2020, people were still trying to figure out, like, where is the money going to go? Well, what happened in 2021? Well, was it virtual reality, augmented reality, autonomous vehicles, Web3, crypto? Probably not so much crypto. Well, what was it? It was AI. So it really kind of spiked that. You see that huge tentpole in 2021. So each of the technologies that I just mentioned, they're still, the jury's not out yet. They're still emerging. The adoption rate is, probably flatlined, but we'll definitely see some spikes. But just for some perspective, the entire VR industry as it stands right now, considering we have an Apple employee here in the room with us, the entire VR industry right now is equivalent to just 2% of Apple's 2021 revenue. I mean, you compare anybody to Apple and they're going to look pretty small, but not a huge industry as far as, of course, they could probably change that in June if they announce a mixed reality headset. So where's all the hype coming from? Well, there's sort of this pervasive attitude in tech that there's a little bit of anxiety about mobile and cloud being old. We maybe didn't think that until we start really doing the math on some of these. But if you think about it, AWS launched in 2006, right? Almost, I mean, we're flirting with 20 years there. And the iPhone, which is even crazier, just 2007. I mean, that is absolutely earth-shattering technology. It's amazing that it's only been part of our lives for so long. So neither mobile nor cloud are saturated, but they aren't just ripe for sort of the greenfield opportunity that we're seeing. And then if you just look at the private capital here, it's absolutely just vulgar. The spike that we're seeing, the venture capital activity that we're seeing here in tech. And at the same time, a lot of the AI technology is actually maturing. Some of the most compelling stuff that we've seen recently, I mean, if we just take 2023, the obvious 2023 emergence out of it, AI has improved dramatically over these years. For those of you that use Gmail, believe it or not, the completion in Gmail is very much how these large language models are actually built. And the autocomplete feature was something that people just wanted to turn off. It was almost unusable. Now it's actually crazy good, and probably going to get even crazier good when language models are doing all your correspondence for you. Even Facebook users, of which I apologize, I am not one, but they have their own. They have a bunch of different models. As a matter of fact, Meta does. One of them I'm going to talk about at the end of the presentation. And their deep face engine is now actually better at facial recognition than humans are, which is insane. Humans not pictured in this particular one. And just since last summer, we've seen the emergence of everything from Stable Diffusion and Midjourney, and of course, ChatGPT, which I'll get to in a moment, or Lenza. AI is definitely becoming mainstream. So if you kind of look at this sort of sums it up. The revolution that we saw with mobile, spurred on by 2007 advent of the iPhone, but the App Store didn't really kick in until around 2009. I believe it was 2009. But then we really saw the adoption here from 2009 to 2013, and around the same time we were seeing it in cloud. So the question is, what's next, right? I think all of us here pretty much feel like we're looking at AI as being this the next tipping point. But let's actually evaluate that a little bit. So just as mobile and cloud technology served as a foundation for creating dozens of transformative startups during that time, AI is now clearly playing that role. This graphic here is actually, of course, you might recognize in sort of the background there that that's a Craigslist front homepage. And this was this sort of meme, I guess, that went around for a while during the mid-2000s, around the time that cloud and mobile was emerging. It's called the unbundling of Craigslist. So it's really kind of fascinating to see how all these different mobile/cloud apps just basically took every one of these components away from Craigslist. Not to say that Craigslist, went belly up, but it's just kind of fascinating to see what web was providing, then what cloud made available, and the combination of cloud and mobile as well. So in a decade, in this graphic, we see that the logos of these cloud and mobile companies, who knows, over the next few years, maybe these will actually be replaced with AI first reimagined categories. And a couple of you here will chuckle at this. This, of course, is a representation of the image models, which really, I think, were most of the general public's first aha moment when it came to AI. You can kind of have a lot of fun with it. Text to image generative AI really exploded last year in 2022, but DALL-E itself, the first model, although not publicly available, was actually released in 2021. It then became available to certain users during their beta as DALL-E 2 in 2022, and that's when just everything changed, right? This image, as a matter of fact, not a lot of people had access to it. As a matter of fact, I had some early access, and this photo here is actually from the homepage of my fantasy football league, where I was trolling a beet farming video from some time ago from some coworkers. But this was having some fun with it. Now, of course, everybody can have it. As a matter of fact, I was just back home not too long ago, and my 9-year-old niece was sitting at the table the whole time on DALL-E 2, just making videos and doing prompt engineering, which I was very proud of. But no doubt the image part was really the aha moment where everybody, again, the nieces, the moms and dads and everybody going, oh, wow, what is this thing that everybody's talking about? And it probably had a lot to do with the fact that it's a visual medium, right? Then, so let's look at kind of like how this evolved. So this was just January of 2021 when the first DALL-E was released. If you scrub all the way to last spring when DALL-E 2 came out, and then when the public beta happened around the end of summer, you might not be familiar with, but Meta has their own Make a Scene. This crayon, that's actually the one that my niece was on. It's a DALL-E Mini. You might remember that that was something that was available before DALL-E 2 beta came out, just within a month of each other. A bunch of other ones, Google Imagen. Google also has another one, Party, and then Stable Diffusion, which I'm going to get to in a second, is actually kind of a different concept, and frankly, unfortunately for them, probably got them in a little bit of legal trouble because of that. The interesting thing about Stable Diffusion is that they were really the first open source solution in this field. The interesting thing about Midjourney, not listed, but the interesting about Midjourney, it was really popular for its accessibility and ease of use. Although some would probably argue that having to access that service through Discord, another application, might be a little unusual. But at the same time, its simplicity is amazing. Like you literally just, put in a prompt / and then just say whatever you want, and incredible, like really amazing things come out of it. And how popular is it? Well, it's the most popular server or like group on Discord with 7.4 million members. Just for some perspective, the previous most popular server was something called the Genshin Impact server, which has around 1 million. So it was like 7 times more popular than anything that's been on Discord before. Yeah.
Stable and the other ones that are getting sued by the.
Yeah, and I thank you for teeing that up, because I will talk a little bit about the specifics of that. It's really kind of fascinating, and DALL-E is not being sued for that, and there's a reason. It's really pretty fascinating. So language models, on the other hand, this is really where things went bonkers, right? I mean, it's even hard to think about when we were all just fascinated with DALL-E before all of a sudden ChatGPT came out. But here's the timeline there. So I think this is a really important takeaway. ChatGPT was not the introduction of language models, right? I think those of us here in the room know this. I know I've had conversations with you all about that. In fact, GPT-3, which is just the version 3 of the GPT model, was released in June of 2020. The public beta actually didn't come until about 6 months later in December. So it was out, it was available, and you could go to something called the Playground, which a lot of you probably have access to now. So you could go into the Playground and mess around, but you really couldn't do Playground with API connections until about 6 months later. But from that moment, from December 2020 until now, I mean, look at all these different models that have emerged. No one is really talking about the other models, but the reason I wanted to, really show this is actually, A21 Labs, they're out of Israel. I actually started off my day talking with them this morning. And then we see maybe a couple that people are familiar with, Lambda from Google. Google also has Palm as well. Meta. I'm going to talk about a really cool model that I'm excited about that Meta's coming out with. And some of these are, some of the Chinese models. And frankly, since I put this together just a weekend or so ago, there's already been a couple more that have been released. So the point of this is that this is really, this is a space race. And so we know that, a really interesting technology can come out and we can all get excited about it. But what makes that acceleration even more extreme? When a bunch of other competitors get into that space and they just start trying to outdo each other. So this is actually what's already occurring. And this only goes up to last August. So, something to think about there. And so now what's next? Well, this really sets up for a potential like King Kong type emergence of GPT-4. As a matter of fact, just sitting in my car before I came in here, I'm starting to hear a little bit more of the rumors. They're starting to heat up a little bit. OpenAI announced some things where they have essentially an enterprise, I think it's called Foundry or Founders or something, literally just learned about it about an hour ago, that allows enterprise customers to get like the big fat pipe access to their models. And it's very expensive. It's not anything that, we would need in the type of applications that I've talked to you guys about. But this is GPT-3 right here. So the way that you measure these things is not in the amount of data necessarily, but they call it, but in parameters. So it is about the data, but there's only so much data out there. So there's different ways that you can approach this data and turn these into models. And those are determined as far as parameters are concerned. GPT-3, which is right about there, for some perspective, has 200 billion parameters. Or I'm sorry, the original GPT had 200 billion. GPT-3 had 475 billion parameters. GPT-4 is projected to have 1 trillion. So that we're talking about an order of magnitude. So if the things that you're looking at now are amazing and fantastical, or maybe have some errors or potentially sentient or super lonely, like you were describing before we got started, this is the kind of thing, this is the kind of order of magnitude that we're looking at here, and potentially right around the corner. And then, of course, what got us all talking to each other, what got us all coming to this presentation and talking about this, none other than ChatGPT. If you guys gotten your plus yet, not so much. Oh, well, it's rolling out on the wait list. Just throw your $20 down. The turbo mode is now changed to the default. It's a little bit different than maybe what your experience is right now.
What is plus versus just the standard?
Speed. So it's it is considerably faster. You know how like you wait a lot for it to run, but the big thing is it's just up all the time. So like when you you and I were talking about it not being available. None of that. That's basically what you're paying for, is to have that access. So if you think about then on the free side, it's going to be even less likely for you to get on because you're sharing the pipe with paying customers. Now, this is absolutely bizarre. This is the end of February. It was just November 20th, like right before the holidays, this is ChatGPT entered our lives. And within 5 days, it gained 1 million users worldwide. So to put that into perspective, that is a world record. The next most popular app, I mean, we'll call this an app, I guess. It's sort of a experience that was close to that was, I think it was TikTok took 25 days to get to 1 million users. Then within just 2 months, 60 days, ChatGPT reached 100 million users. So 100x in just a course of less than 60 days, which makes it officially the fastest growing consumer app of all times. So for some perspective, I mentioned TikTok. It took them about 9 months after their global launch to get to 100 million. And Instagram took 2 years to get that long. So, and again, it's a free app. They're not even the plus part, and it was at 100 million. So, because it came out just before the holidays, ChatGPT really went from a holiday conversation piece, if you happen to have some tech nerd like myself in your family that you had to sit and listen to drone on about this stuff, to now it's absolutely headline news. As a matter of fact, I think we can all point to this really interesting moment. I don't know if you guys have seen this yet, but I'll go ahead and play this. Sorry about audio, but check this out.
Hey, it's Ryan Reynolds, owner of Mint Mobile. We're always looking for ways to save you money. So this year, we're kicking things off with an ad that I created using ChatGPT, the AI technology. This is what I asked it to write. I said, write a commercial for Mint Mobile in the voice of Ryan Reynolds. Use a joke, a curse word, and let people know that Mint's holiday promo is still going, even after the big wireless companies have ended theirs. This is what it wrote. Hey, it's Ryan Reynolds here. First of all, let me just say Mint Mobile is the shit. But here's the thing. All the big wireless companies out there are ending their holiday promos, but not Mint Mobile. We're keeping the party going because we're just that damn good. Give Mint Mobile a try. And hey, as an added bonus, if you sign up now, you'll get to hear my voice every time you call customer service. Just kidding, that's not really a thing. And stay classy, everyone. That is mildly terrifying, but compelling.
Mildly terrifying and compelling indeed. And I don't know if you guys have seen this cover of Time magazine this week. ChatGPT, honest to God. Obviously talking about it as a news item, but also it helped write this article with the 2 humans. You don't see this here, but Andrew Chow, Billy Perigo, and it says humans underneath it. So, I feel like we're all probably pretty compelled to actually mention that when we're writing things. The last 2 things I've posted, I did in fact have to say, I actually did write this, not some
Human verified.
yeah, human. Yeah, actually, let's get Elon on that. So how do we put this all together? So this is actually, kind of an important timeline. the agricultural revolution gave us food production at scale and let us transition from being hunters and gatherers into farmers. I mean, literally, we were all just hunters and gatherers before the agricultural revolution. And then when we were all farmers, like literally every high school would just teach you how to farm, and you'd go off for secondary education. Most of those were trades. That was the industrial revolution, which gave us manufacturing at scale. Then I'd argue that not pictured here was the digital revolution in the 90s, of course, right? .com and just personal computers and the emergence of them. But that would kind of fit, somewhere in there, just for the scale of this. So transformative AI, is it fair to think that we might be at like that level? I mean, we've never seen anything at such an acceleration rate. We've never seen anything with this much impact, and the amount of apps and services that are launching, whether successful or not, but that are launching right now on a daily basis is kind of unforeseen. Just to kind of give you an idea, this is just about 2 weeks worth of news and releases in the AI space, specific around like ChatGPT, language model, some of the Google stuff there as well too. So definitely bonkers. I think it's pretty clear we're at this interesting inflection point at this point. So thought it was kind of neat to sort of take a moment to look at how we got here, and think about maybe what we're looking at right now. So definitely going to change things. Opinions, thoughts, musings, terror that you're thinking about in any of these things. Kind of crazy to think about how fast this has occurred, huh?
Yeah, it's kind of never going back. I mean, you let it out there, and then why didn't go back to follow?
I don't think it can. We're going to talk next about, well, we'll get to the legal, concerns that have popped up around this. And, that's not even going to stop this freight train. It's all going to get worked out. Compute power is not even going to stop this freight train. It's absolutely, there's no stopping this. So it's just, what is it going to look like when we're done? And I don't even have the hubris, frankly, to say, I even know by June what everything's going to look like. I mean, it's hard to talk to customers about, strategizing. Mostly right now, I'm saying to people, hey, this is what I think you should do. And there's a model now that can handle that. And by the way, there's probably another one. It has to be part of the strategy. There's another one coming on its heels, maybe even just a couple months down the road that we want to transition to.
You're talking about legal bid. Is this on lawmakers' agenda? I mean, does our government have any idea?
That is a fascinating question. So the question is whether there are lawmakers that are paying attention to this. So I don't want to turn everybody off to GPT or anything, but one of the founders, including the current CEO, Sam Altman, was Elon Musk. And there were a couple other luminaries, one more than a name that you would know, but it's escaping me, so maybe I don't even know it. But they all got together literally as a nonprofit consortium with the very concern that you just mentioned in mind. Like, holy crap, these things are going to go live, and if they just release this stuff, we need to rein this in and figure this out. Elon actually ended up leaving somewhat because of a bit of a conflict of interest with his Tesla AI stuff that he's doing on the robotic side even, but also because he was concerned, and as a voice when he's not on Twitter trolling everybody, he actually is a very loud voice globally about legislation around AI. And then somehow that not-for-profit organization called OpenAI now is probably one of the more for-profit organizations in all of tech right now. So
Shooting power was pretty expensive.
Yeah, oh, definitely. No doubt about it. Yeah, that's a big deal. Like, you can't be offering that stuff for too long before you need a little bit of help from like a big brother like Microsoft. So I do recall having just maybe either heard or read something about this. These are the types of things that are going in front of legislation right now. I don't know if we can really trust all the, luminaries and geniuses that are, who have absolutely no clue. That's exactly it. I mean, honestly, like, they didn't even know he was a robot. Like, come on, like, are you guys paying attention? So I'm a little concerned about that. I think if you wanted to squint really hard and see what's coming with this is the difference between, one of the big differences between ChatGPT and just the standard model that it's, one of the models that it's connected to, which is the GPT-3 or 3.5 model, is for example, you could go into GPT-3 or, through an API call, and you could say, tell me a yo mama joke or something like that, some sort of like, pejorative type request, and it would tell you something and come back with something like that. But if you go into ChatGPT, you can't ask it anything negative at all. You can't say, give me 3 most efficient ways to murder somebody. Like, those are a little harsh, obviously, but even the lighter stuff on the scale, they completely just stop you from that. So what's interesting about that is actually OpenAI with their army of labelers that are going in, and they're moving the needle on what stuff is accepted, what stuff isn't. I think, depending on what side of the aisle you're on, there was the recent comparison between if you ask it to write a poem about Biden or as opposed to one about Trump. One of them was flowery, one was extremely negative. Depending on where those, rooted in truth or not, it's clear this isn't an even playing field. So this is happening at the corporate level, at the model level. And I think it has to, because these are literally brands that can't be reckless with their own brand and all of a sudden get canceled or something like that, right? So right now, it's literally the labelers at OpenAI and Facebook and Google. And two of them.
They have been for years.
Well, and
now it's a more conversational way, rather than presenting a bunch of results that you choose which one you want to pick.
We had the same conversation about Google with search. I mean, if you think about it, it's really the same kind of thing, thought, like, what can I find on here? Well, Google's been in charge of what we see when we search for many years now, actually.
It's the equivalent of a meeting.
No, it's exactly that. Well, because I think more people will be getting their information from this type of thing soon. So someone's got to be controlling the spigot.
You created this monster, and now you're in there moving things around. Imagine the conversation with the behind the scenes. If you're getting it cool, you can kill them. It's like, oh, it's good for profit, but it's not good for society. And maybe it's too long of a conversation, but there could be different versions of that. You could have if it was like a media, right? You could train it to be based on your audience, or liberal or more conservative audience. You could have it respond that way, and people might go to that like they were going to Fox. It's like which outlet do you want, right? Because
I think you're onto something there.
You could tweak it to be the way you want it to be in your own private environment. Right?
It's going to have to. No, it's going to absolutely have to be that. As a matter of fact, OpenAI just had an announcement last week, if I'm not mistaken, where they addressed this very issue that we're talking about. And they said, look, we get that currently we're the ones moving all the switches, and they didn't announce what they're doing, but they just said, we're exploring other ways to expose these filters and settings and allow people to choose their own. Yeah, well, essentially they're saying, when you put your brand in front of it, you can have it spew out all sorts of yo mama jokes and stuff like that. So, and I think that's fine though, but currently right now, the stewards of the tone of what's coming out of these language models are these corporations. And depending on, what part of the country you're in, you may or may not agree with Bay Area politics, but it is definitely Bay Area politics, right? So kind of fascinating, nonetheless. But so I think by summer, we're going to hear what US legislation, they're going to be talking about. I can't even imagine a bunch of people who've never run a business before, how they're going to actually talk about this emerging tech. If they could all just at least write a poem with ChatGPT first, that would make me feel, a little bit more comfortable, but I'm afraid to see what happens. But there's a real get the genie back in the bottle situation here though, no matter how you slice it.
You can just put it into the model and say, just create legislation for yourself, and you made the model. Boom, done.
Why not?
Spit it out, there you go. Yeah.
Well, and
Fold it on.
I think the comment you made earlier about just who is our audience, and the audience will find us because we have the spirit of that. It's the same thing we see with cable news, right? So I think we'll maybe see something similar here. I mean, it's fascinating. I'm already feeling like this is one of those topics where in 2 months, we're going to be laughing at oh, yeah. Remember back when we had a choice or whatever, the deal is. So it'll be really interesting to see. And a lot of it is going to be, I think our great white hope here is, if I can transition into this, is that there is so much competition with this right now. So if OpenAI was the only model out there, which I think most people think is the case, but if that was a true story, not like what I showed earlier with all the different models that are out there, not all of those were from the US either. Like China is very much emerging and will be a topic of conversation before GPT-4, for example. So the competition element, I think, is going to have to make it less constrained because there's just so many players in this that some opportunist will just pop their head up and go, oh, we don't have any filters at all. Just come to us and do whatever you want, right? Like all it takes is one of those things to happen. Sans legislation, of course. Now a quick review on Google versus Microsoft. There's some kind of comical and entertaining aspects of this, but also very fascinating. And I think there was a pretty aggressive, cool business throwdown move that happened that I'm not sure if everybody was familiar or not. But this news, we're here on the 22nd of February. This goes back just to the beginning of this month. On Wednesday, February 1st, Google demoed its latest advances in AI search at a live event in Paris. And in their most interesting demo, they showed off how they're going to use generative AI in the future to summarize information from the web. And why was this such an important event for Google? Well, everyone's been talking about Google's dead or search is dead, right? And I'll expound a little bit upon how much search matters to Google in a second. But my personal anecdote with this that I'll share with respect and deference to my father, who will likely be watching this recording at some point. When I first introduced him to, I put a website together called summonthebot.com and allowed people to just interact with GPT-3 in their own way. And I gave it to him last summer, and I was trying to get him to like use it like for business purposes in a way that we've done it at my business, where we've integrated in incoming leads. We have it evaluated, and I think I've shown that off to you before, and it's on our iSolutionsAI YouTube page too. But it just evaluates incoming leads and writes some use cases and kind of upsmarts your sales team so that we have more credibility by the time you talk about it. So I was encouraging him to do it. And I'm giving him a ton of credit here because what he ended up using it for was essentially Googling things, like, as we know, Googling, like using it instead of a search engine and just doing requests and response, not chatting with it, but, and I'll admit, maybe I chuckled to myself, but a couple of weeks later, that was exactly what the discussion was about. It was like, oh my God, this is going to kill Google. And how are people going to monetize this? Like, it's really going to be fascinating how this works. So Google got into giddy up mode. Like they heard all this. There was some whispers around Christmas time where they had initiated internally a code red, which meant drop everything. Let's figure this out before someone eats our lunch. And if you think about it, we're not saying search is going to go away, but if just all these language models took 5% of their search share, that is a devastating amount. I mean, it's not going to make Microsoft the next big Google, but it's going to be potentially devastating to Google. But well, look, they're pretty insulated. But the most fascinating thing is what happened here. So first of all, February 1 is when they announced they were doing their presentation. And in what can only be described as a gangster move, Satya Nadella at Microsoft said, oh yeah, okay, well then the very next day we're going to announce our updates. So he moved up, who knows when it was supposed to be, but it was purposely moved up to really steal the thunder of Google. And boy, did that work. Google helped out though, because Google gave a brief demo of Bard. Say what you want about the name, but here's some of the examples. It's very much like what we're already used to with the ChatGPT experience. And they showed off how they're going to use generative AI to summarize information on the web. And they gave this brief demo of Bard, asking the chatbot questions about the pros and cons of buying an electric car, as you see here. So that one worked out kind of nicely. And they're using the same sort of thumbs up, thumbs down reinforcement learning, which is really the magic behind the ChatGPT experience, is that humans can actually say, yeah, no, that's wrong, so make it right. And by the way, that's where we're going to see a lot of the truthfulness issues and the errors that people are talking about now go away. But then the very next day, in the move I described before, Microsoft announced the new Bing. And Yeah, you called me out earlier. I had Edge up. I know just a couple hours ago, they did announce the chat version for Edge on the devices, but this is kind of rolling out to like partners and sort of in early testing. But so what was this? They announced what they did is they extensively demoed the features, and they also rolled it out to some of their early testers as well. So really so technically Bing got GPT into search before Google even did, because Google was just showing stuff that they were doing in the lab, right? And they weren't talking about releasing. And in the case of Microsoft's examples, they were showing things like this. Like if you really look closely, for those of you that are here instead of watching a recording, those little numbers that you see there are citations. And that's a really interesting part of this, because very much like Wikipedia has citations, this is probably where attribution is going to come from and potentially monetize it in the future. Although it's a little confusing. I'll explain in a minute, like how Transformer, well, I'll say it right now. It's kind of confusing because I want to be really clear about what happens and is not happening with Transformer models. It is not going and taking everything that's been on the internet, well, 70% of everything that's ever been on the internet, because the rest of it's behind some sort of a wall, a subscription wall or a paywall or something like that. And it's not taking all that information, and then you ask a question, and then it goes and finds where someone had written something and said that exact answer and presents it to you. It's a completion model. So what it's doing is it's predicting with some level of probability. Hi, hey, how are you? Come on in, I'm Chris. Pleasure to meet you. Have a seat. So what it's doing is the magic of it is completion, right? So when you're putting in the prompt, it's just predicting with probability what the next piece of text should be. So it's not going and finding something that somebody said on the internet and then just regurgitating that back. So that's why, and if you want to actually set up a transformer to do so, you have to make a decision on to what level of granularity you're going to be, literally the literal terminology is tokenizing that data. So if we want to tokenize paragraphs and sentences instead of words, or even, vectorize, I'm sorry, the actual words themselves are broken down into tokens. So we're actually vectorizing at sub-word levels right now with this text. But if we have to branch it out to entire statements like that one, just for attribution, the models just aren't going to be the same. They're just not going to be that powerful. So it's a really interesting thing that's happening there.
How do you figure out who gets paid for that?
Yeah, well, if you want to make it so wide that you know that you can actually point to who actually made that statement, then it's just going to lose a tremendous amount of the power that it's got. Or you could just say, yeah, you were part of this corpus, and so your 0.006 of a cent is in the mail, basically. So kind of interesting there. So anyhow, that's kind of a sidebar, but the really interesting thing that did occur, and just want to apologize to, actually, this is kind of cool too. So Edge browser. So what you're looking at here is one of their previews about Edge browser. This is actually LinkedIn, and you're creating a post, and then you can pop up this Copilot over here on the right-hand side. And it just allows you to be able to write, you pick your tone, you can pick the format, the length, and it'll just generate a draft for you. I will admit that I have been responding to all LinkedIn messages that have been sent in my direction since about October of last year using GPT myself. So I'm glad to have this.
So much better than it was.
Yeah, for some reason, I have a lot more followers and engagement for some strange reason. So yeah, people are like, wow, that Chris guy, where's you been? So, and apologies for those that I've been carrying on conversations with on there as well too. So one of the interesting things is Satya Nadella was like throwing the gauntlet down. He was having fun with this too. He literally made a statement that says the race starts today and we're going to move, and we're going to move fast. And he knew he was barking right at the folks at Google. Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, that is. Then something happened that I think maybe is somewhat comical, but largely unfair. So then the Bard gaffe happened. So Bard, this was actually before the Paris event that had occurred. they released this tweet here that you see, an experimental conversation AI service powered by Lambda, da 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 da. And then they put in there, here, I'll play it here. They said, what new discoveries from the James, oh, I got it here. What new discoveries from the James Webb Space Telescope can I tell my 9-year-old about? The chat bot responded with the claim that the JWST was used to take the very first pictures of a planet outside the Earth's solar system. Twitter users quickly pointed out that the response was inaccurate since, of course, we all know the first pictures of the so-called exoplanets were actually taken by the Southern Observatory's Very Large Telescope in 2004. So it's basically wrong. And, it's fine. But I guess if you're going to, make a big announcement right before everybody goes on stage to talk about your new technology, maybe pick one that was right as the idea. So, and this literally happened just hours before. So what was the impact? This is mind-bending. Google's parent company Alphabet, their shares tumbled 7.7% on that same day with concerns over the competency of their product Bard. And then the sell-off continued into aftermarket trading and then to the next day where they lost an additional 5.1%. What does that mean? Well, that erased about 170 billion in market value. Oops, right? So and just to put some perspective on that, the fact that sell-off was far bigger than the 2.8% drop that they had when they missed earnings, I think the week prior, you can see that investors are very interested in this AI arms race, right? So anyhow, I'm sure you guys heard about this. Does anybody have a dog in that fight? Any Google, Microsoft? No? Okay. But fascinating nonetheless, the impact. Yeah. Oh, see, now I have to do, now I have to put a language warning on the recording. Yes, but no, but there's a couple, I think there's some important things to think about here. So first of all, I don't think Google's in that much trouble. I mean, search is in trouble for the reason that I mentioned before, because all these, other language models can just chip away at them and make a big impact there. But I don't know, I'm a huge fan of this and I want to see this adopted everywhere and I want to see the new search be this. But at the same time, like, I'm not envisioning how shopping is going to work. If I want to be honest, since I put these slides together, I've gone on Google to search for airlines and I wanted to look at it in a matrix and see all my different options. And I've clicked through them and linked over somewhere. I've done image searches where I was looking for, images for different things. Done some shopping, even looked at maps to even look at the map for this location here this evening. These are all interface challenges that, chat will need to accommodate. But there is no doubt, hands down, chat will rule when it comes to I just need a piece of information. Like I don't need to be, swimming around in a bunch of links to figure that out. So, but there are some elements here that, if you're a Google stockholder, well, actually, maybe it was a good time to buy back on the 9th. But where else do they make their money? Well, they make more money in embedded ads on websites with it's AdSense or AdWords. I forget which it's called commonly. They make more money on that than they do on search. So that's interesting. So they're still insulated to some degree. The other part is the cost. ChatGPT costs about 30 cents to present a response to a user. While Google results cost 0.025 of 20, not 25 cents, but 0.025. So that's about a 10x difference in cost. Now, in order for Microsoft to be competitive, they'll figure, that's going to come from new silicon and compute power and new models, frankly. But that, just to kind of extrapolate that out, that's going to be, Google spends about 8 to 20 billion per quarter on just showing the results, right? So it's not all just free money for them. And at a 10x margin for Microsoft coming into this space, they're going to have to really accelerate on some of this processing and figure it out, no doubt. The other part that's really interesting with the Apple employee I know here in the room, there's a thing called TAC, traffic acquisition cost. You may have seen that Apple pays Google, or no, I'm sorry, Google pays, of course, silly of me. Google pays Apple 15 billion just for the exclusivity of search on devices through Safari and I guess it's Safari on all the desktops, but on your iPhones and iOS and on the desktops, no doubt that is going to be renegotiated. I think Apple is in a pretty good spot to say, hey, how about 30 or 40 or 50, just because then they can actually lock down, that acquisition cost. And then the other part is, how's Microsoft going to monetize this? We talked a little bit about the challenge of attribution in there. If you really want to have this thing be as magical as we're experiencing ChatGPT to be right now, it's going to be really difficult to find a model for this. As a matter of fact, Satya Nadella, who I just quoted earlier, he was in another interview and was just extremely evasive around the question that was being asked of him, like, how are you actually going to monetize this? And he's like, oh, people will still want to click on links, and they're like, oh, you're going to have links? I'm not really sure how we're going to do this. So I haven't really figured that part out. Now, I'm not worried about Microsoft. I don't really think they're going to, Pac-Man up all the search. I actually think if you looked at that graph about the impact of Amazon and AWS had on compute when cloud emerged, I think that's the play for Microsoft. So like, as I mentioned earlier today, OpenAI announced essentially their enterprise. I think it's Foundry or something like that, or Founders or something. It's that new. I don't even know what the name is yet, but it's their, somewhere around like $80,000 to $200,000 per month range of compute for these models. So that's actually, Azure is going to benefit pretty greatly from this. So Microsoft's going to make a lot of money on that, but $20 billion has already been invested in this, and OpenAI is projected to show revenue of 200 million this year. So they're kind of doing that startup thing. It's a little imbalanced for the time being. It'll be interesting. Thoughts on which dog would you pick in this fight? Google?
I just don't see them. We'll keep something I actually thought that they received more than 100 billion on the pay-per-click stuff. Now I know they have contextual stuff, but I know it's maybe way off, but
well, at these costs that they would have to.
Yeah. Search results, and if you're getting an answer that's in a chat format rather than a bunch of links that people are paid.
Yep, agreed.
Then how do they continue to monitor? Hey, they're smarter than me. I'm sure they'll figure it out, but it does seem like it'll be interesting to see how that's handled. In the future, if I say, hey, I want to find 5 plumbers in Scottsdale, Arizona, and instead of it being a bunch of different links that come up or something, it lists it.
Yep.
5 different ones where you say the 5 best that can fix a leak. I would just be interested to see how they do it. Again, there's too much money involved. They'll have to figure that out.
No doubt.
I'm curious to see what that's going to look like.
I would like to be would like to go back in time and be a fly on the wall in the meetings where they were like sometimes when you Google like what time is it in Sydney, Australia, it just straight up tells you on the top. I think it's called One Answer or something like that.
Yeah.
I want to know like where did they draw that line?
Right.
Because this conversation happened at one point. Like no one's making any money off of that. I think there's a citation on those. Yeah, the little box that shows up. There is some attribution on the bottom. You can click through to find the answer. But the point is, that's the one thing link you're not going to click because you already got your answer, right? So I don't know. I think that same type of conversation is going to have to happen, frankly. So we'll, I guess we'll see. But Google, Microsoft, Facebook, no, there was like something where some model was going to get data out. I can't remember what it was. Maybe it was Google was going to get data out of Twitter, which would be really compelling data. They definitely have modeling opportunities there, no question. But there's a FANG missing in this whole conversation that I think is kind of interesting. And with deference to your employer, where's Apple in all this? And I have a theory that I think is kind of interesting, and we'll see how this unfolds. Well, first of all, they had their internal AI day just last week, where they had everybody show up at Steve Jobs Theater and talk about their AI strategies, and nothing really leaked from there. They said, we've got a lot of really good talent here at Apple, and they use a lot of machine learning. Like most of us got here because of machine learning on our phones, one way, shape, or form. I'm probably running some form of it as I'm talking to you guys right now. But I think it's interesting. I think it's because they're on the other side of privacy. Right. So they're all about not collecting anybody's data and not having these corpus of data. So I don't know. If just to get it on record, I think their play is going to be on the privacy side. If they can allow all their customers to own their own data and fully control who gets access to the data, then they can plug these into the, you can opt out of being part of these large corpuses of data, but then you have your own data sets. You're like the most proprietary data sets that there is are just your data, that your likes and your clicks on apps and your preferences on different things, the conversations you have with people. Trust me, that data exists in at Apple somewhere, and it knows more about us than anybody else does. So I think there's an opportunity there to allow people to control their own data in sort of this self-model concept and opt into all these services rather than all of them have models that we're a part of instead. But in the meantime, conspicuously absent, certainly. But I love Apple. Stockholder and
Not the thing, but IBM was big leader.
Yeah.
So many years ago.
they were the only game in town.
But that.
Well,
Yeah,
so
well, we don't need to go.
Big Blue beat the I forget the chess guy's name, right? And like they were just
Pretty evil, 10, 15 years.
yeah. So when was the Big Blue thing? Was probably like 25 years ago or something like that. So interestingly, the game Go, I'm not familiar with it, but it's like, like the checkers on steroids or something like that. So two things interesting just happened there. Speaking of IBM's Big Blue and chess, the top Go player in the world said, I'm out because AI can beat me every time, right? And so that was this big deal. Like literally the best player out there says, I'm done because I'm always going to get beat by AI. Then like 2 days ago, someone actually beat AI at Go. And you think, oh my God, humans were back. Unfortunately, they just used AI to run a model against the AI that was beating everybody and determined what its weaknesses were. And that was their strategy. And they were able to win. So AI beat AI actually in that case. So, so close. We were so close there for a second as humans. Okay, so a couple quick things here to, this is really fascinating to me. And I think this is an important topic, the legal issues that we're encountering right now. And I mean, I think this is really, really meaningful stuff. So let's just do some high level on this. So first of all, Microsoft, and this is actually why, and all kidding aside, a little bit of insight I can share is that Apple does have an internal policy that says they will not use generative AI or any code generated from AI in any of their shipping products. And the lines are a little blurry as to where that stops, but that means like, the apps that ship with your phone and all the stuff that you see that's going to be released at WWDC in June, none of that will have been created using any AI code generation. I don't know how that's going to age. I kind of feel like that you're the one US manufacturer that says, I'm not going to buy my stuff from China, like in the 90s. And then, like, you're definitely not in business 5 years later. Apple's not going to business, don't get me wrong. But currently that's their position. And why is that their position? They cite this specific lawsuit as that position. This lawsuit, Microsoft, this subsidiary GitHub and its business partner OpenAI have been targeted in a proposed, but they're just gathering all the people into the class action. And it is definitely coming. It's a class action suit alleging that the company's creation of AI-powered coding assistant, GitHub's Copilot. Anybody here use Copilot? It's amazing, right? Like just absolute game changer. But they say that their position is that it is software piracy on an unprecedented scale. The case is only in its earliest stages, but there could have a huge effect on the broader world of AI, where companies are making fortunes training software on copyright protected data. This is exactly why Apple is not in the large language model space. So their statement is, we're challenging the legality of GitHub Copilot. It's the first step in what they think will be a long journey. And the position is, and I'll get into, what this battleground is going to look like, but just to be clear, these are public repos, right? So GitHub, you can have public or private repos. Private repos were not used as part of the corpus that scanned all the code. It was the public ones. So as a thought experiment, I would throw out there, and I mean, maybe my position on this will seep through to the surface, but let's say I was a really diligent human being and I spent every hour of every day on GitHub learning all this code, learning things about JavaScript, Python, I mean, you name it, all sorts of really interesting things. And I was so diligent about it that I learned everything there is to know as a human being. I then go on to create a bunch of code and, now I'm an expert at it. I generate a bunch of code and, hey, maybe one of those things turns into an app where I become a billionaire. I'm also an educator personally, and I have a ton of stuff out there on the web where people have taught themselves how to do things. And if I ever caught wind that one of them used that knowledge that I was a part of and became successful, I think it would be a little silly for me to say, hey, where's my check? Because I had a bunch of free YouTube videos out there that you watched and taught yourself all the stuff. So I think that's sort of the philosophical battle that they're against is so both sides of it can be illustrated by this. You made a choice to make that public for a reason, right? And then that it was scraped. But they're saying we made a choice to make it public for human beings to find, when they're trolling through GitHub. We did not make the choice to be part of this corpus of data that trained the language models. So I don't know how you get the genie back into the bottle on that. On the flip side of the GitHub Copilot, the users just released a couple days ago a survey where all their respondents indicated that they 46% of them were actually using GitHub or Copilot, and it was saving them, I think it was like a third of the time or more in actually in what they're able to produce. So they're becoming hyper productive using this tool. And I think that the ripple effect that has throughout the software industry everywhere except for Apple is going to be significant. So Microsoft is going to have to deal with this. I'll talk a little bit about what their position is in a second, but there's a couple other lawsuits that are interesting and worth knowing. Back in January, or just January 13th, a couple of illustrators in Northern District of California sued Midjourney, DeviantArt, which is behind an app called DreamUp, which I'm not familiar with, but it was mostly Midjourney and Stable Diffusion, right? And not DALL-E. And that's because these two, because the technology that's actually used, which I'll describe in a second, actually legitimately starts off with, I probably won't do it justice, but it starts off with an image and actually diffuses the image into something that the user met with the prompt, whereas DALL-E had trained it on a bunch of different images and their relationships to other things, and so it's creating these things. So I think specifically, and I think that's important because they're not cited in that lawsuit. So they're indicating, these individuals are indicating that these text-to-image platforms are the 21st century collage tools that violate the rights of millions of artists. Chiefly, their complaint is that AI generators have used their artwork without consent or compensation to build these training sets. The thing I think is most interesting is there's one company, this German company called LAION Aesthetics. They're the ones that actually created this in both of these cases, and they're not the ones that are being sued. I think maybe that might have been a mistake on behalf of these artists. Just go for the source. They're the ones that Stable Diffusion and Midjourney got the corpus from. So that's kind of interesting. You're familiar with that group?
I'm a training model. I love this together. I think we're probably going to have enough money.
That's of course.
Then you talk about the business and somebody else is looking at your money.
Yeah, you're right. So go for the ones that definitely have a lot of cash in the bank, and that's just smart suing right there. Good point. That's a very good point. This one I got to give a little bit of credit to because you might not be able to see it. Maybe on the recording people can see, but so what's happening here is on the right-hand side is an image that was generated by Stable Diffusion. And on the left-hand side is one that was in Getty Images. It's not that they're similar, but if you look really close, there's a blurry Getty Images watermark there. Yeah, oops. So what they did is they scraped all those preview watermarked images as part of their corpus. That they might have a little bit of an issue there. Again, that's that same organization that I mentioned before. So there's another one, Getty Images is actually accusing Stability AI of brazen infringement of Getty Images intellectual property at a staggering scale. I don't disagree. I mean, you just look at that and it's pretty clear. So
I didn't mean that attorney.
oh man, they're like, wait, what? Oh no, you couldn't even, he's got 6 fingers, but you can read the word Getty, no problem. Like you could have blurred that one a little bit. So Getty Images CEO came out and said that they're not actually seeking financial compensation or to halt the development of generative AI, even though I think they have the strongest case of any of these. But they want legal clarity as to the rights of creators and entities, and I don't disagree with that. I thought what was kind of interesting is there's Getty Images, and then there's another Getty Images competitor. You guys would know that.
Yeah,
actually.
they're all kind of.
Whoever like
Getting bought everybody.
whoever they didn't buy up, there's one more. And right after this lawsuit came out, they released they're like, hey, are you creating AI generated artwork? You can come sell it on our platform. Like they have a whole section for it. So they sort of embraced, you know, the artists, so to speak, that were creating these. So the reason DALL-E's not in here is because Stable Diffusion uses something that literally diffusion model, which it learns to create images from text prompts, but they work their way through these massive training sets by recreating these as opposed to creating them from scratch. So that's kind of interesting as well too. And then, you know, and so in general, what are the defenders of AI? I guess I would call myself a defender of AI. I just want to see it be successful without friction, and maybe that's because I don't have any code on any public repos in GitHub, or I'm not an artist. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Any of those things. I'm just a consumer and an AI guy, right? So what they're all hiding behind is not hiding behind, but their position is that they've long claimed that fair use protects them in the event that their systems were trained on licensed content. So the fair use is a doctrine that was enshrined in US law that permits limited use of copyrighted material without having to first obtain permission from the rights holder. There's a case, a specific case that was Authors Guild versus Google, where a New York-based US Court of Appeals ruled that Google manually scanning millions of copyright books to create their Google Books data set was actually without license to create their book search project was fair use. So that on the books right now is what all these companies are saying. Hey, you had a chance to stop this from happening before. Now,
Is that because it was an education angle?
yeah, I think it's specific. Yeah, definitely education, but also, yeah, it probably does actually have an angle on the whole like Chromebooks in schools and the whole, you know, deal there as well.
Education's not like. So if you can prove that you're not monetizing whether you're teaching them, it's you're protected.
There are these like checklists. And it has something to do with being transformative, and it has something to do with whether you're permitting that author from making, like you're now making their book free or something. So now they can't actually sell. Like that's really where it comes into play. But in a we're going to get some definition on this as soon as the summer, I'm sure, right? I found this interesting article in Bloomberg Law just a couple of weeks ago that asserted that the success of a fair use defense will depend on whether the works generated by AI are actually considered transformative. In other words, whether they, and this is important, in other words, whether they use the copyrighted works in a way that significantly varies from the originals. So I don't personally, I think what comes out of ChatGPT as far as like writing is concerned is in fact is almost by definition transformative, because these are not things that someone has said before. If you really look really hard at what the transformer architecture actually is, it's a completion. It's just predicting what literally the next letter should be, and then that predicts what the next word's going to be, and that predicts what the sentence is going to be. It's literally just a mathematical algorithm that says this is what this person most likely wants us to write. So at some point we'll be able to determine how much of this is, original. And I think it's going to be really hard to defend against that. But what do I know? Along those same lines, there was a previous case law, Supreme Court's 2021 Oracle versus Google decision that suggested that using collective data to create new works can be transformative. So I don't know, there's in that case, actually, Google was using portions of Java SE code to create Android operating system. And that's where that, and it was determined to be fair use, which I think is going to be problematic for the GitHub suit more so than the artistic ones. I don't know, where do you guys land on that?
I think if you can put in and say, hey, I want it to be in the style of a certain artist.
That's troubling,
the
right?
artist, the remedy might be that you say, hey, you cannot use my name as a part of that, have that be part of the trained model, right? They can
Or license it.
Yeah, they can easily change things like that, right? If I would do anything about artists, I would be able to name it.
Like maybe one, I know I'm having trouble myself.
Current artist or something like that, who's maybe art is being styled after that, and they are using money for game art because it can be generated in a fashion that is, instead of them creating it newly, where they maybe would have been hired, right? And then,
Totally agree.
then there is.
For living artists,
Yeah,
that's
the
what
same
we're
for
talking
living
about,
artists, right?
because
So-
then you are keeping them from making money
Right,
off of
right,
this.
right.
And I would think for estate artists, there would probably be some just protection of like, hey, I don't want someone creating art that might be mistaken as the art, the original art. But I just think the way that we all, everyone in this room can remember the first time you ever saw a Photoshopped image. It was like pretty like, oh my God, like there's no way that person's actually doing that or whatever what the deal was. And now then it became part of the zeitgeist where we're literally like, oh, that's Photoshopped, right? Like the trust of, like, you would see a photograph and be like, yep, that happened. I have a photograph of it, right? Then trust diminished because, oh, now Photoshop, I don't believe anything that I'm seeing. Now we're in the era of deep fake and, generative AI. And it's just like, how do you trust anything that you're seeing as being, the thing that it says it is?
It doesn't mean to be like the original people. Like I heard somebody talk about, if you're a therapist online and you publish a bunch of kind of therapy tips, you can make money doing that, whatever. But now if you ask ChatGPT, give me a good routine to get over depression, or give you a great answer, an answer that's as good as if you surveyed 1,000 therapists.
And that's just it.
It's become a commodity quickly, so what if you are a religion? How does that lock into this? How does it lock check you? It's getting sucked up into the general.
I think you're on to what does original even mean, anymore? Like, what does that even look like? And then what's your thought on that?
I was gonna say a little different than that, right? But I saw something that I thought was interesting. It was there's a piece of artwork and it didn't say the artist, it said has prompted by.
Oh, wow.
This was like a mainstream piece. Mainstream, whatever it was. I forgot what I was looking at, but it said as prompted by.
That's
And I
interesting.
thought like, okay, that was a pretty interesting thing. And not already, but just a few months after after mainstream people, certainly in the US, are familiar with AI rather than many of us that for many years known about it, but.
Well,
I just thought that was an interesting way for someone to talk about that.
Yeah.
Share their artwork. Their work by saying it has prompted.
Right, my muse was.
Yeah, give them full credit.
Yeah, so prompt engineering is, I had an interesting conversation with someone who I was creating some content for that is meant to be consumed by tech people in the Bay Area who, want to get a new job and, upskill themselves. And I was saying, I think prompt engineer is going to be a job. And they challenged me and said, maybe, but for sure it's going to be a skill. Like it's literally going to be a requirement for a job. I don't have that in this presentation, but there was I keep seeing these job postings on AI Twitter that say, a prompt engineer. We want a prompt engineer. I talked to somebody who was consulting for an organization, a subsidiary of Apple, that said they recommended to their incoming new VP of marketing that they get a prompt engineer headcount on the budget. And these are like things that are just coming, months after. And honestly, if you really dive into doing some prompt engineering of your own, if you really see the type of stuff you can feed into even ChatGPT and control what comes out, I mean, there is an art, at the very least, a science to this, and there are going to be people that are better at it and people who are worse. I will give you guys a little nugget of next big thing. And then I go back and I'm talking to my wife. She teaches middle school kids. And so she came home that day and I said, hey, I'll tell you what I'm talking about in a second, but what are these topics? What are the topics of noun verb agreement first person, second person, like what are all these things? And she kind of hits like what learning level it is. And then I go, okay, well, what about these different things like descriptive adjectives and things like that. And then we kind of landed on, it was like middle school, 7th and 8th grade English. And to me, I believe that's the playbook for prompt engineering. And here's why, because language models have been taught the rules of how we express ourselves in language. And those rules are actually covered in English and the rules about how we construct sentences and and then even if you look into pragmatics, like the dialogue between individuals and sort of the cadence of that, those are well documented and have been for generations. I really think that blowing the dust off of a 7th or 8th grade English book to teach yourself prompt engineering, I think might be a interesting little cheat code moving forward. Now, the bad news is my wife then told me, yeah, you're onto something. This is all, you're right. This is all stuff that we teach, except the federal government in the US no longer tests, no longer thinks this is necessary to test. So no one cares, basically. So USA.
7th grade English may have its moment in the sun yet.
Exactly. I know. I wish I could get a hold of my 7th grade English teacher because she would be so proud since I mostly didn't pay attention to anything she said for an entire year of 7th grade. Okay. Well, I got a couple more little miscellaneous things for you guys here. This one I think is fascinating. It's more of just a thinker. I'm going to play a little clip here. This is from the All In podcast. Thank you very much. If you guys aren't listening, it's a bunch of VCs. It's a great weekly podcast. You should check it out. But one of the individuals here, when they were talking, this was back when ChatGPT, I think this was like in December or something like that. And they were talking about ChatGPT and the impact there. And one of the individuals talked about this idea of models as a service. And I just want to be clear, models as a service was kind of a thing that meant something different than what he's describing. But we're loosely on the fringes of SaaS, and some of the comments he makes about SaaS and proprietary data, honestly, like they have spun me into this whole orbit of many different ideas here. So let's take a listen to this real quick.
Yeah, lots. I mean, I've been spending a lot of time learning about this area. 6 years ago, a team that I partnered with who was at Google that built TPU, we've been building silicon for this space. So we've been kind of going from the ground up for the last 6 years. A couple things that I'll say. The first is that I think we're going to replace SaaS with what I call MaaS, which is models as a service. And so, a lot of what software will be, particularly in the enterprise, will get replaced with a single use model that allows you to solve a function. So these chat examples are one, and you can name a bunch of SaaS companies that were purveyors of SaaS that'll get replaced by essentially GPT-3 or some other language model. And then there'll be a whole bunch of other things like that. If it's a, expense management company, they'll have a model that'll allow them to actually do expense management or blah, 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 forecasting better. So I think SaaS will get replaced over time with these models incrementally. That's phase one. But the problem with all of these models, in my opinion, is that they're still largely brittle. They are good at one thing. They are a single mode way of interfacing with data. The next big leap, and I think it will come from one of the big tech companies or from OpenAI, is, and I talked about this a few episodes ago, a multimodal model, which then allows you to actually bring together and join video, voice, data in a unique way to answer real substantive problems. So if I had to steel man the opposite side reaction, so I think there's a lot of people gushing over the novelty of GPT-3. If I had to, or ChatGPT, if I had to steel man the opposite, what I would say is it's going to get somewhere between 95 to 99% of all of these very simple questions right, because they're kind of cute and simple. There is no consequence of saying write a play because there is no wrong answer, right? You either kind of, it tickles your fancy or it doesn't, it kind of entertains you or it doesn't. When this stuff becomes very valuable is that when you really need a precise answer and you can guarantee that to be overwhelmingly right, that's the last 1 to 2% that is exceptionally hard. And I don't think that we're at a place yet where these models can do that. But when we get there, all of these models as a service will be very much commoditized. And I think the real value is finding non-obvious sources of data that feed it. So it's all about training. So meaning you can break down machine learning and AI into two simple things. There's training, which is what you do asynchronously. And then there's inference, which is what you're doing in real time. So when you're typing something into Chat API or Chat GPT, that's an inference that's running and then you're generating an output. But the real key is where do you find proprietary sources of data that you can learn on top of? That's the real arms race. So one example would be, let's say you build a model to detect tumors, right? There's a lot of people doing that. Well, the company that will win may be the company that actually then vertically integrates, buys a hospital system and get access to patient data that is completely proprietary to them and covers the most number of women of all age groups and of all ethnic categories. Those are the kinds of moves in business that we will see in the next 5 to 10 years that I find much more exciting and trying to figure out how to play in that space. But I do think that ChatGPT is a wonderful example to point us in that direction. But I'm sort of more of that case, which is it's a cute toy, but we haven't yet cracked the 1 to 2% of use cases that makes it super useful.
So a lot of really interesting points there, but I think the big takeaway is the proprietary data part. If you just look at, if you talk about all the data that's ever been on the internet ever, as I alluded to earlier, 30% of it is not part of the corpus of data that we're familiar with from like GPT-3 and such, and that's because it was proprietary. Even more so are, and I come from, custom or from business application space, and 100% of my customers have proprietary data. So to me, I don't even think I feel strongly that, he's talking about at enterprise levels and VCs and where, that money's going to go. I think today, right now, being able to layer using technologies of either fine tuning or embedding, layering proprietary data for every organization between language, conversational AI, the new version of conversational AI, and the users themselves, I think is already going to radically change how business applications work and how business and users interact with their data. And I say that because for 25 years, I've been building business applications for organizations and doing our absolute best to try to remove the friction between what the user needs and what data they can get to in the form of reports or dashboards, or I know you were in the BI business for many years. It's literally about top lining this information. And we have to figure out who the users are going to be, not just right now, but who the users are going to be a year from now when this organization is still using this application, and what needs are they going to have, and how is the data going to change, and how is the organization going to evolve. There's so much dead data just sitting around in every single organization that's not working for organizations. I remember I told my old business partner in 1999, I was like, man, we've been doing this for a couple of years now. What's going to happen when we fix everybody's data problems? They're all fixed by like 2001. Like, then what are we going to do? Like, are we going to be in this business? And I'm here to tell you in 2023, data problems still exist at the highest levels of organization. And this concept of dead data, meaning there's data just sitting there that we haven't figured out how to, extract intelligence from. I think this is what I believe strongly, that these mechanisms are going to allow organizations to layer those into language models for some incredible stuff to occur. So that's my thought on models as a service. And yeah, I'm sort of betting sort of betting my career on it. I'm basically saying, you know, there's a lot of disruptive, there's definitely a lot of disruptive industries out there. No one is talking about business applications or SaaS really as being one of those that's about to be disruptive. And I'm saying as a you know, award-winning lifetime achievement winner from my particular sect of business application development that I think we're next. So I'm going to go on the AI side and actually help businesses make the most out of the data that they already have, because no one else has their data but them. And that's what I think really incredible things are going to happen. So thoughts on that? I mean, you're not going to steel man me, I guess. I just said I was betting my career on it, but yeah, actually, I may have said too much. I'm going to edit this part out of the video, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. So to close things out, I just got a couple of news things for you guys, and we'll let you get on your way. First of all, just earlier today, so, you know, we had OpenAI and Microsoft. We had Google actually merged with this company called Anthropic. And that was just, I think, like a couple of weeks ago. Now, Hugging Face and Amazon, really AWS, have indicated that they've been dating, so to speak, in the background, and they've now made it official. So this is another one of those mergers that are happening, and their goal is aimed at making it possible for people without an insane amount of funding to train their own generative ML models with the highest performance at lowest cost. AWS, if you're not familiar, already has a ton of, they have a SageMaker tool where you can create your own and train your own models. They have a bunch of really compelling models. They have a conversational AI model called Lex, which allows you to sort of talk to data. You have to build in a lot more intelligence into Lex than the language models allow. But I think this kind of cooperative is going to make a low-code AI something that we're going to see moving forward. And then finally, my favorite thing, just to totally nerd out on this, the thing that I'm most fascinated with in AI right now, and when I say right now, I mean February of 2023, because March, this might already be solved. But there's a couple issues with language models. First of all, there's a thing called the relevance gap, which means that even the most recent language models were trained as of like October of 2021. So if you ask ChatGPT who won the Super Bowl, it has no idea because it still lives in 2021. So how do we actually, well, and so the answer would be, oh, we'll just make it so that they retrain these models in real time. Well, right now, it costs $40 million of cost to do a new version of a language model. That's not, obviously that's not going to work. Like, we can get to compute power, but if you start putting even more compute power on it, look at the conversation people were having about how crypto was destroying the environment. Imagine what language models that are you know, creating language models in real time is going to do in cases like that. So the answer actually is, forget about having the corpus of data have all this information. Just allow the language model to learn how to talk like humans and communicate like humans. And then what we do is we go pull data from API sources. Actually, Bing is doing something similar. Pull real data in the API calls appropriately and put it into the context of the conversation that humans are having with language models, and amazing things can happen. There's already some technologies out there. I'm very compelled by this Langchain methodology where you can do this exact same thing that I'm talking about. This is also one of the ways that I'm seeing that organizations can get their live data into these instead of using this embeddings concept. So this is actually from Meta, called Toolformer. There's two interesting things here. One, Meta released Toolformer last week. Well, all that means these days is they wrote a paper and they dropped a paper. There's nowhere to get this right now. And a lot of the papers that have been if you watch the AI papers, it's really kind of amazing, all the stuff that you're seeing here. But essentially what this is and when it's available, is it is identifying where in your prompts and the data that you're looking for, where an API call needs to be made. And it's actually making the call for you, grabbing that data and inserting live data into your discussion. So, and also it has tools like calculators. So for example, if you want to figure out the math of 1,400 participants or, 400 of 1,400 passed the test, believe it or not, language models aren't so smart when it comes to math on their own.
What's the smart one? What's the smart, math? I forgot
The one for, Wolfram, yeah. So that would be a great idea. So for example, there's a tool, a calculator tool, but if you want to do some like real scientific mathematical modeling, you absolutely go to Wolfram. Here you can see one so this is from question and answer from the Massachusetts Medical Society, answered this part of it for him. This calculator did the math on that one. And MT, I'm not sure what that is, but it actually did the conversion of, what a turtle is in Spanish. And then finally, Wikisearch actually inserted the information on that Brown Act there. So this is, for my money, this is where things are going. And these are the types of tool sets that I'll be incorporating Langchain and this Toolformer when it comes out. This is what I'm betting on for the future. So it's basically just a language model data set, make some sample API calls, execute the calls, filter that information out, and incorporate those into the results that people are seeing. So keep your ears to the ground on Toolformer. And again, Langchain's another one that's doing something similar. And the whole concept of embeddings, meaning taking data and so I'll end with this. The most incredible thing about ChatGPT, believe it or not, isn't really GPT that is incredible. It's the chat part of it. It's because, like, for example, and this should be like, oh yeah, no kidding, but really think about this on your drive home. If you open up a conversation in ChatGPT and say, when was OpenAI founded? It will answer, whatever, September 2015 or whatever it was, right? Then the very next thing you ask is where? You just simply type the word where in there and it'll say, oh, San Francisco, California. Now, if I put if I open up another conversation and just typed in where, what's ChatGPT going to say? Hey man, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean where? Like, it makes no sense. As a matter of fact, we were doing some direct GPT calls for one of our customers who were doing, we're writing copy for them for product descriptions and SEO keywords and stuff like that. And then actually doing legal audits against the generated context. But in one case, we were pulling data from a record in the database system. And in one case, our calculation was broken, so we weren't pulling anything in. So instead, we were just saying, write a description about, like literally that was the prompt. And then when we were testing it, we were freaking out because we're rolling out for a demo. And it was like, well, as a single mother of 4, I'm a da-da-da-da. And we're like, what does that have to do with hard hats? Like, we're like, oh my God, it's going crazy. And then we hit it again and it was like, pizza's my favorite food. And we're like, what the hell? And so the point is, in the absence of any instruction whatsoever, it's going to answer and it's going to say something kind of crazy. Confidently, yes, as a matter of fact. So the point is, the context of that conversation is why the where made sense in the first example that I said. So loading in a bunch of information into these conversations before the prompt actually occurs is referred to as context or loading context. This is the idea behind embeddings. You can load, I just did something last weekend that I wrote a context that was like this long, where I was saying, I was doing a Siri thing. I'll put some stuff on YouTube, but I was saying, hey, Siri, tell me something about the data in my CRM that we run our business with. And I was telling it, hey, if you hear me say company or project, then it's this table in my system, and these are the different values. And I did this whole definition, and I was just loading in that context so that by the time I said, what kind of blueprints do we have in the pipeline right now, it already knew all this stuff. If I just said that to ChatGPT, it'd be like, I don't know who you are, what a blueprint is, or what your pipeline looks like. But that's the idea of taking all of this, contextually and loading that in. So I would challenge all of you, as you play with ChatGPT, to just load a bunch of information in and watch how it then changes the conversation that you're having. I would even say copy and paste a spreadsheet full of data into ChatGPT and then ask some questions of it and see what comes out of it on the other end. So that's my I've said too much thing of today. And the good news is I'll release everybody back into the wild and end our recording right now. And I appreciate the folks' attention and everybody who's listening to this recording, and for those of you that actually showed up here. So thank you.